zoom out, not that far. Okay. Today, I think it's going to be a relatively shorter lecture. Okay. We're going to talk about mineral supplementation. And then the last bit of the lab, we're going to open up the OSU calculator and we're going to go through how to evaluate a given forage system and identify mineral deficiencies. Then we're going to go through some examples of formulating a mineral to correct those deficiencies. Okay, cool. So there's quiz. Okay, so today I want you guys to understand different supplementation strategies. Okay, both mineral supplements and then concentrate supplements that we could provide. So the concentrate we really went over last week. So I guess that'd been Thursday. Okay, understand how we can use different software ration formulators to identify deficiencies, and then how we can use them to formulate a mineral that we can feed to cattle on pastures to amend those deficiencies. Okay, and then know what typical mineral is needed under common pasture systems. Okay, most forages are going to be deficient in salt. So at a minimum, we usually will have to provide cattle with salt. However, if it's a warm season pasture, beginning of the season, we may not need to provide much else. Okay, there may be very minimal deficiencies other than salt. In legume pastures, alfalfa, we may not need to provide any mineral. They may be getting adequate minerals through that forage. Okay, lower quality forage, we may need to provide a lot of different minerals, fill a bunch of deficiencies. Okay, so minerals expensive. So best practice is to change what we're feeding cattle to match that given scenario. Do we think most producers are doing that? Probably not. Okay, they are probably feeding the same mineral year round, if they're feeding a mineral at all. Okay. All right. And then we really want to pay close attention to some of the special cases that we'll talk about, chiefly cool season small grain pastures, so winter wheat, and how excess potassium can cause antagonistic effects with other minerals, namely calcium and magnesium, and can lead to grass tetany. Okay, so I have a threshold that you'll have to remember for what your potassium to calcium plus magnesium ratio needs to be below. Okay? Cool. I believe so. I think I recorded it to the cloud. Yeah. Which recording it to the cloud is a game changer. Takes much less time. So I'll try to do better at uploading these lectures. Okay. All right. Macro minerals and their importance. Won't delve into this too greatly. Don't expect you guys to memorize all these. And this is also not exhaustive. Okay. All right. Calcium, obviously important for bones and teeth. Okay. It's also important for nerve and muscle function. So is magnesium. Magnesium is important for nerve and muscle function. So that's why when we have cattle grazing wheat pasture that has a very high amount of potassium, potassium is antagonistic to absorption of calcium and magnesium. So we have low amounts of calcium and magnesium being absorbed into the bloodstream for those cattle grazing wheat pasture so that they can't have normal muscle or nerve functions. They get non-mobile. They can't stand. Okay, that's called grass tetany. We see a similar thing happen to cows grazing higher quality pastures during the onset of lactation. Okay, where their demand for calcium increases so high for lactation that they don't have enough calcium in their circulating bloodstream to have normal motor function. Okay? All right. Phosphorus, important for reproduction, bones and teeth. Okay. Calcium phosphate salt, named apatite, is the main inorganic component of bones. Okay. Magnesium is important for growth, reproduction, metabolic functions, and nerve and muscle function. Uh, it's a cofactor in a lot of different reactions in protein, carbohydrate, and fat metabolism. Okay. Potassium, metabolic functions, nerve and muscle function. It is important in cellular osmolarity and acid-base equilibrium. Okay, so one thing we'll talk about when we're going to discuss ionophores, Meninsin, is how those ionophores pump potassium into those cells and create an imbalance in extracellular pressure, right? So it causes an osmolarity imbalance. So we'll talk about that further. Then sulfur, so important for metabolic functions, amino acid formation in the rumen. So the microbes in the rumen, their special power is to take nitrogen and a carbon skeleton, and they can synthesize their own amino acids. Okay. A lot of these amino acids are sulfur containing, so they need sulfur to form those amino acids. Okay. Too much sulfur can lead to some issues, though. This is typically seen in finishing diets, okay, where we have high amounts of corn milling byproducts, like distillers' grains. Okay, the threshold is about 0.4% of dietary dry matter, and then above that, we can start seeing some issues. So what happens is called polyoencephalomalacia, so PEM. Two main theories on how sulfur-induced PEM occurs. One, sulfur in the rumen gets converted to hydrogen sulfide. When they eructate that hydrogen sulfide and then breathe it back in, it can have can cause nerve dysfunction. Okay. The other theory is a sulfur-induced thiamine deficiency. Okay. Increasing sulfur content increases the demand for thiamine by the host animal, and so eating more sulfur, using more thiamine, causes PEM. Okay. PEM characterized by aimless wandering, circling, blindness, head pressing, ataxia, muscle tremors, and eventually can lead to convulsions and death. So when we see these animals acting all funky in a feed yard, they're commonly called brainers. Okay, so they're exhibiting their nervous system is having issues, not acting normally. Okay. All right, microminerals. Okay. So they're micro in the fact that they're required at smaller amounts. When we're talking about macrominerals, we're talking about percent of dry matter. Okay. Microminerals, we're typically talking about their inclusion in ppm. Okay. Parts per million. So you can think of a percent as a part per hundred. Okay. So ppm is a part per million. So that could be 1 pound per million pounds. Okay. These would include chromium, so that's important for immune response, glucose tolerance factors. So chromium helps insulin regulate blood sugar. It's immunostimulatory and immunosuppressive processes. So chromium is important for lymphocytes, macrophages, and cytokine production. So it's very important for the innate immune response. Okay. Cobalt, it's a component of vitamin B12. Copper, important for hemoglobin formation, tissue metabolism. Iodine, obviously important for thyroid hormones, energy metabolism, and heat regulation. Okay. Manganese, it's a reproduction enzyme formation, cholesterol synthesis. So manganese is actually a cofactor for some of these metalloenzymes that are needed for cholesterol synthesis. And then cholesterol is a precursor for steroid hormones, so testosterone and estrogen. Molybdenum is important for enzyme activity. Selenium is important for antioxidant production. predominantly this glutathione peroxidase enzyme. Okay. Then zinc is important for enzyme activity, and it's required for the function of over 300 enzymes in the body. Okay. So all this just to say minerals are important. Okay. They have wide-ranging impacts on our body. So yes. No. Main thing is just around grass tetany, which we'll talk about more, the calcium and magnesium and how that grass tetany happens, right? Low circulating calcium, low circulating magnesium causes the animal not to have normal nerve function. Okay. Okay. So minerals are important. Minerals are also expensive. Okay. A 50-pound bag of this all-purpose cattle mineral from Purina costs $30 at Tractor Supply. I'm sure you could get it cheaper somewhere else, but this is the easiest thing to Google. Okay. 50-pound white salt block, on the other hand, costs under $10, so $7.59 at Tractor Supply. So if we're providing minerals to forages that don't need anything other than salt, we're spending a lot of money that we don't necessarily need to. Okay. Then we'll just look at this real fast. I'm sure many of you guys have seen a feed tag. Okay. So they'll tell you the name of the mineral, what system it's meant for. They'll give you a guaranteed analysis. Most of these minerals will be expressed in a minimum. So at minimum, this mineral is going to be 18% calcium. Okay. Okay. They'll give you a directions for use. So what your target intake should be. So for example, this one, your target intake is around 4 ounces per head per day. Okay. What else? If it's medicated, it'll tell you that. It'll give you a feeding rate. Okay. So typically we're going to feed minerals somewhere around 2 to 4 ounces per head per day. Okay. How can we regulate that? These are offered free choice to cattle on pasture. Can anyone think of some strategies that we can use to regulate intake, this voluntary intake, to be around our target for the average animal in a herd? What are some strategies we can employ? Anybody think anything?
A lot of work if you have like a trap system where it's like where they go out to graze and then you have like a trap that just has
So like restricted access?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Not a lot of work, but
Could, yeah. Two easiest ways that I know of. One is play around where your mineral feeder is in relation to your water source. So if they're eating too much of it, move it farther away from their water source, or the areas where they like to mingle. So move it farther away from shade. Okay. Another one is add salt. So cattle have a threshold of how much salt they'll eat in a day. So if they're eating too much of your mineral, add a little bit of salt, more salt to it. If they're eating too little, don't add as much salt to your mineral. Okay. Okay. All right. So now we're going to look at a few tables showing what's in the calculator. Okay. For mineral content of warm season perennial forage, or different forages, but in this instance, it's warm season perennial forage. Bermuda grass vegetative is what it's called in the OSU calculator. Okay. For this scenario, we're using a 550-pound steer that's targeting a gain of 1.9 pounds per day and eating 14.4 pounds of dry matter per day. Okay. So with the requirements that this animal has, Bermuda grass vegetative would be right at or the content is here in this column. The requirements are for the animal are here in this column, and this will tell you the status. Okay. So we are meeting all of our mineral requirements except for sodium. How would we provide sodium to cattle? Salt. Okay. So even highest quality Bermuda grass pasture still going to need some source of salt to meet sodium requirements. Okay. But everything else is adequate. Okay. Now this is the lowest quality Bermuda grass can be. So this is Bermuda grass that was stockpiled, allowed to go dormant, and now we're feeding it to cattle in November to December, so winter. Okay. Still adequate on calcium, still adequate on phosphorus, still deficient in sodium, but now we're deficient in potassium, good on magnesium, deficient in copper and zinc. Okay. So higher quality forage is going to have more mineral content and it's going to be better at meeting those animals' requirements. As it gets lower quality, we're going to start becoming deficient in more minerals. Okay? All right, here we have wheat pasture. We are deficient in calcium. Okay, we're good on phosphorus. Our calcium to phosphorus ratio should be what? What were you saying, Katrina? 2 to 1? I usually operate on greater than 1.5 to 1. Okay. Um, okay, so our calcium to phosphorus ratio is under 1. So we would need to add calcium not only to meet that deficiency, but also to maintain our Ca to P ratio. Okay. We're deficient in salt. We have excessive potassium. So it's about 3.1% of dietary dry matter. That is very common for winter or cool seasons pastures to be very high in potassium. Okay. We're good on magnesium, deficient copper, deficient zinc. Okay. Importantly, remember I said our potassium to calcium plus magnesium ratio needs to be less than 2.2. Okay. That's kind of our target to protect against grass tetany. So who wants to do that math real quick? What is 3.1 divided by 0.35 plus 0.24? 5.25? Is that greater than 2.2? So these cattle would be at risk for grass tetany. Okay? So even though we're adequate on magnesium and we're deficient in calcium, we need to add calcium and magnesium to get underneath that 2.2 threshold. Okay? All right. Took this table out of, I don't even remember what book, to be honest. But here we have alfalfa / clover, so legumes, Bermuda grass, fescue, native range species, and then small grain forage. And then these give you the range or the animal requirements. Okay? What do you notice? Anything jump out to you? All of these species are going to be pretty well deficient in salt. Okay, like we've seen. A lot of these species are adequate in phosphorus, except for our native species. Salt's deficient. Iron's not a problem. Some may be deficient in our microminerals, really, except for our legumes. Okay. Okay. Okay, almost all forages are going to require salt supplementation as a source of sodium. Okay, if I ask you, what is the mineral that most forages are going to be deficient in? Sodium. Okay. Really low quality forages may require supplemental phosphorus. Okay. Higher quality forages are likely okay with phosphorus. Copper and zinc, typically the microminerals that are going to be deficient in forages. Legumes and high quality grasses may require very little mineral supplement on top of salt. Okay. But the specific deficiencies are going to be driven by the forage type, forage maturity, forage species, right? But also the animal characteristics. So dry matter intake and average daily gain, right? As an animal eats more, will the requirement as a percent of dry matter be less or more? So as an animal is eating more dry matter, will that percent of dry matter content of any nutrient need to be a higher proportion or a lower proportion if average daily gain is not changing? I don't think I'm asking it lower. Yeah. So if performance is not changing, remember animals have a absolute requirement and not a requirement on a percentage basis. Okay? So if an animal is eating more, it'll take a less concentration of that any nutrient in that diet, forage, ingredient to meet those daily requirements. Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay. So the content or the specific deficiency is going to be driven by animal type, level of production, the forage system, season, forage maturity, species. Okay. Um, Hopefully we've demonstrated that minerals are important. They're very important for all metabolic functions. Okay. Forages are not balanced to meet animal requirements. Okay. Minerals are expensive, so we need to use appropriate minerals that are formulated for a specific scenario so that we avoid overfeeding expensive minerals, which is a waste of money. Why feed that $30 for a 50-pound bag of Purina all-purpose mineral when I can get away with an $8 just white salt block? Okay. And then we also don't want to underfeed metabolically important minerals, which would hinder performance and then lose, so I'm missing an O here, I think, money from lost gain. Okay? It's kind of like an opportunity cost. Okay. Specifically on wheat pasture, grass tetany, high levels of potassium in forage can decrease magnesium absorption. They have an antagonistic effect. Magnesium is required to activate the kinase enzymes, which are needed for muscle contractions. So grass tetany, also known as hypomagnesemia. So hypo meaning what? Low, right? So low blood magnesium. So grass tetany occurs when plasma magnesium concentration is less than 1.5 milligrams per deciliter. Okay? We have an animal that gets grass tetany. What can we do? Typically, we'll give an IV, so direct drip into the jugular vein, okay, with a magnesium and calcium solution. We need to do this slowly. If you infuse it too quickly and the heart gets a big slug of calcium and magnesium, it can cause a heart attack. So typically we have a down cow, we have our IV, we stick it, hook up our solution of calcium, magnesium, typically you want to hold it chest high. That's about good for the higher you go, the more pressure will be on the line, just like water towers for our water line, right? So typically hold it chest high and it'll be at an adequate rate where it's not going to cause any heart attacks. Okay. Prevention, we want to have the total diet potassium to calcium plus magnesium ratio to be less than 2.2. Okay. Without mineral supplementation, using what's in the calculator, okay, we are at 3.6. Okay. Now there's going to be a range in what that number is for a given wheat pasture. However, it's always going to be at risk, especially for cattle who are just introduced into that system. Okay. All right. How can we supplement? So my uncle's farm equipment dealership, we sold Sioux Steel. But we can have an upright mineral. This thing costs about $400, probably more since I created these slides because of inflation. But this, you put the mineral in here. So there's two places an animal can eat. This is sitting on a ball bearing. So as wind hits that fan up top, it'll keep it to where the back of that feeder is against the wind. Okay. So that if rain's coming and wind is blowing that, it keeps a lot of the rain out of where the mineral is. Okay. This up top here is just like a fly powder thing so that when they're in there eating their mineral, they're getting some fly treatment. Okay. Or we can have a ground feeder. So this is somewhere around 170 to 240 bucks. So within that, there's like 4 or 5 compartments that you fill your mineral up with. Animal comes in, they lift this rubber flap, they can get access, eat mineral, kind of free choice. Okay. Then when they're not there, that rubber flap falls back down, keeps rain from getting into it. Okay. We can do something that's cost less money. So we can make these feeders ourselves. Some setup like this where we're just buying wood, buying the troughs, and then making a flap that goes on top may cost 50 bucks. I don't know. Okay. So now you are welcome to get out your OSU calculator and follow along. It's under your course software module on Canvas. Okay. Now I just kind of want to demonstrate different scenarios in practice. Okay. Okay. Let's look here. All right. Initial body weight is 650. Final body weight is 840. I guess a lot of people may not be familiar with the OSU calculator. If you did feeds and feeding here, I know you are, but for others, you may not be. It's just a ration formulating software that Oklahoma State University made for free. Dave Lawman made it. I think my dad's helped with it. But it's free, commonly used in nutrition classes, including our own. Did you guys use it in Missouri? You did? Oh, Kansas? I don't know why I think Missouri. I always think that you went to Mizzou. Okay, Kansas State. Okay, pretty simple to use. So here you can select your class. We're always going to use growing slash finishing animals, right? But you could use this software for mature cows, mature bulls. Okay. Um, Here you can specify the number of feeding days. I think in all these scenarios, I'm using 100. Okay. You can specify the group size, which doesn't really change anything until you go to the summary sheet. You can set your initial weight. You can set your final weight, which, what did I say, 840 in the PowerPoint? Okay.
Is it supposed to be with the software? I can't specify the calculator.
Is it not? Well, crap. Well, it may not be on undergrads. Okay. Okay. Well, follow along. Okay. We'll do this will also be lab next week. Okay. So you'll get some practice. All right. Here you specify a finished weight. And so really this should be the final body weight for an animal that's 28% empty body fat. So that gets used in the energy requirement calculations to estimate how much NEG they need for a given pound of gain. Okay. Okay. You can change your genetic growth potential. We'll just keep it at average. You can change body condition. So this is where fleshy animals would get discounted um, compared to thin, right? Where thin animals would get more energy out of a given diet, right? Have a greater rate of gain. You can say if they got implanted or not. You can specify different ionophores. So this is really going to impact the dry matter intake models. All right. So it comes built in with a whole lot of different feed ingredients. So they're grouped up by grazed forages, harvested forages, concentrates, commercial feeds, minerals and vitamins. You can add new ingredients. So say you wanted to customize it to the quality of hay or whatever that you're feeding at your own place, which I would highly recommend, not really ever going off of book values, right? You can change that. We could also add in the Purina mineral, right? We could add the information for that Purina mineral we just looked up at based off the feed tag. And then we could evaluate, is that mineral going to be good for my system? Does that make sense? Okay. So here's where you balance the diet. You can specify if you want to do it on an as fed or dry matter basis. I always do it on a dry matter basis. Here, when you're putting in values here, you can do this on a per pound per day basis, or you can do it as a percent of dry matter of the ration, right? Pasture cattle, I always formulate on a pound basis. Okay. TMRs, confined feeding animals, I'm always going to formulate on a percent of dry matter basis. And this will hopefully become clear why I do that. Just makes it a little easier. Okay, this first example, what are we doing? Alfalfa, and then we're going to supplement 1.5 pounds of ground Milo. Okay, so go to here, feed category, click this down arrow, grazed forages, down arrow, alfalfa. You kind of have to have a starting value. So this is the predicted intake. So if we fed this animal that we specified under here on this tab, alfalfa, then they are expected to eat 17.4 pounds per day. So what I like to do is this is the sum of all these columns, okay? I like to make sure that this cell, and this cell all line up. And then here's where you specify feed intake, okay? This is predicted feed intake based off NASA models. So I always try to make this feed intake ratio, which is the ratio of this to this, I always try to make it 1, okay? So here I have 17.4. So this animal, I said, was going to start out at 650, end at 840 over 100 days. So using that, it calculates what my desired average daily gain is, okay, which is 1.9. For today, we're just going to ignore that. Then projected average daily gain is what the models would suggest that this animal would do. So it's saying if we're grazing fresh or green chop alfalfa, they are projected to gain just under 1.5 pounds a day. Okay? Anybody have any questions? Okay. So here, this is kind of a summary table where we can identify deficiencies. Okay. Ignore this toxic, right? If it's a forage, we can't control how much potassium that forage has. So we can ignore that toxic. I don't know why they have it. But you can see a lot of these minerals are excessive. They're well over our requirements. Okay. So this tells us the dry matter content of each of these nutrients. Okay. And this tells us what that animal requires each day. So if this content of the forage is greater than required, obviously we're meeting requirements. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. So we are deficient in copper, we're deficient in zinc, but we're adequate in sodium. And then this is the only annoying part. What is 2.9 divided by 1.8 plus 0.36? Anybody doing that math? What's that? So we're below the 2.2, so we don't have to worry about grass tetany or alfalfa. Okay. But we are deficient in copper, we're deficient in zinc. Okay. So I think in here I say we're going to supplement ground Milo at 1.5 pounds a day. Okay. So that animal is expected to have a 1/10 of a pound increase in total intake. Okay. So we're increasing our total intake, but our forage intake is going to go down. So I need to adjust this to, I don't know, 15.9. Okay. So now this cell matches this cell-ish. Okay. Now this cell matches this cell, matches this cell. Okay. So our forage intake went down by a pound, 1.3 pounds. Okay. We supplemented 1.5 pounds. So what kind of response to supplement is that? Who remembers from our previous lecture? So supplement intake is replacing some forage intake, but not at a one-to-one basis. Partial substitution, yep. So that's a partial substitution of supplement for forage. Okay. I will say these NASM models are not the best at predicting responses to forage intake in response to a supplement, right? Kind of is what it is. All the intake equations are solely based off of energy, so based off of NEM value. So if we have a forage that is suppressing intake because it's deficient in crude protein, and we provide a supplement that's ameliorating that deficiency, right? It may not show us the actual response in forage intake that we would expect or that we see in practice. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so I add this 1.5 pounds of ground Milo, still deficient in zinc, still deficient in copper. I am adequate in sodium. So I can go here, mineral and vitamins, deficient in copper. So we can use copper sulfate. So copper sulfate is a micro mineral. So do we think we're going to add a percent or a pound? Do you think we're going to add something very, very small? Okay. I always start out with something like 0.005, and this is going to be excessive. Nope, adequate. Okay. So now we're adequate a little over on copper, but we're adequate for copper. still deficient in zinc. So we have zinc oxide or zinc sulfate. I don't know, you can probably get away with using both. Zinc sulfate, so sulfated minerals have a better bioavailability than oxides. So I always just kind of use sulfates. They're going to be a little bit more expensive, but we'll just do that for the sake of today. Okay. So 0.005 is way excessive, so we're way oversupplying. But this heck of a small number is deficient still deficient. So in feeds, they called this the trial and error method. 26. Okay. So at 0.0005 pounds per head per day, we are now adequate in zinc. Okay. But we're feeding a mineral, free choice to cattle, that is 0.005 plus 0.005, so 0.005 times 16, 0.005, 0.0005. So we are feeding cattle 0.088 ounces per day because there's 16 ounces in a pound, right? So do we think we can adequately provide a free choice mineral that's going to supply less than an ounce a day? Probably not. Okay. So even though we're adequate in sodium or adequate in calcium, doesn't necessarily hurt to provide more so that we have a mineral that's in that 2 to 4 ounces per head per day range. So we could do that. So there's sodium. There it is. Sodium chloride, which is salt. Okay. Okay. So now we have 0.11 times 16. So that's 1.76. So we can actually add a little bit more salt. Okay, let's pretend that gets us up to 2 ounces. Okay. So now you come here to the summary page and you can uncheck these boxes for the things that we don't want included in our mineral. Okay. And if I was going to make a 2,000-pound batch of this mineral, I would need 1,929 pounds of salt, 6.43 pounds of zinc sulfate, 64.31 pounds of copper sulfate. Okay. So we could buy each of these individual minerals, mix it together, and then offer it to cattle, and it should meet these requirements, mineral requirements that these cattle have on this alfalfa system. Okay. Do we think many people are formulating their own minerals? Think they're just going to the store and buying something? Okay. But if you go out and you become a consulting nutritionist, maybe a good idea to understand how these minerals are formulated. Does that make sense? Okay. All righty. So in another example, we're keeping initial body weight and final body weight the same. We're going to look at mature Bermuda, and then we're going to compare with and without whole cottonseed or cottonseed meal at 2 pounds per day, which ends up being 0.3% of body weight. Okay. Graze forage. Got to start somewhere. So they are predicted to eat 16.8 pounds of mature Bermuda grass per day. So add that there. Change this. Okay. So lower quality forage than the alfalfa. We are now deficient in sodium, cobalt, copper, and zinc. Okay. Lower quality forage, we're now deficient in more things. Make sense? Okay. Cottonseed meal. What did I say? 2 pounds a day. Okay. Okay. So this matches predicted intake. Feed intake ratio is 1. Okay. With the supplement, this animal is now projected to gain 1.0 pounds a day. Okay. Where without, it is 0.72. No, 0.82. Okay. So what would this supplement conversion ratio that would be expected based off NASA models? So 2 pounds of supplement added, how many pounds again? 0.2. So what is that, a 10 supplement conversion ratio? Is that similar to what we saw in last lecture where we looked at supplement conversion ratios identified using live animal trials? It's quite a bit higher, isn't it? So these models are just not very good at demonstrating the appropriate response in forage intake with supplementation. But it is what it is. Okay. So I have 2 here. So it's 15.1. This is 17.1. Okay. So we are deficient in calcium. We're deficient in sodium, deficient in cobalt, copper, and zinc. Wrong one. Okay, with 0.1, we are over on sodium. 0.05, we're a bit just that double what we need to meet our requirements. 0.025, we are right around good. Okay, for sodium, minerals, so calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is limestone. Okay. So here we have calcium. We're just barely deficient. So we need, or our dry matter content is 0.25. What we need is 0.26. So it's going to take a pretty small amount. So 0.01 pounds per day. We're now good on calcium, copper, copper sulfate. Okay, 0.005 gets us a little over, but adequate on copper. So cobalt. So 0.005 is way too much cobalt. This very, very small number is still too high in cobalt. Okay, so that gets us good. Zinc. Over here to zinc sulfate. Okay, 0.005 gets us good on zinc. So check how much that, or our Ca to P is too low. So we need to actually add more calcium than what is needed. Okay, so 0.1 calcium, even though we were good on inclusion to meet requirements, we were below our 1.5 to 1 Ca to P ratio. So we need to add more calcium carbonate to this supplement to adjust to our Ca to P ratio. Does that make sense? Okay. So this supplement, we're saying to meet all requirements, to have adequate Ca to P ratio. I'm not worried about potassium to Ca to P or Ca plus magnesium because the potassium content of this is already under 2.2, right? So it's going to be smaller than 1.34, which is our potassium content of the diet, right? So don't need to worry about it. Okay. But C to P ratio is good. This animal's going to eat about 0.13, 0.13 times 16. So that's right at 2 ounces per head per day. So would be pretty comfortable with that mineral. Okay. You have cattle that are eating too much of it, add more salt. Too little, take less salt out. Move it closer, farther from water. Okay. All right. Um, let's skip this one and let's go to our wheat pasture one. Okay. So grazed forages, wheat. Okay. Predicted to eat 17.3 pounds. Okay. So with forage only, this animal is projected to gain 2.35 pounds a day. Okay. With forage only, we are deficient in phosphorus. No, what is that? Calcium. We're deficient in, what is this? Sodium. We are deficient in copper, and we're deficient in zinc. Okay. Our C to P ratio is 1. Our potassium to calcium plus magnesium ratio is like 3.6. So we're going to have to add more calcium and more magnesium than is needed just to meet the requirements to get below that threshold. Okay. So I think actually we said they're going to eat what? 1.5 pounds per day of dry rolled corn. Okay. 17. So they're still expected to eat 17.3. That'd be 16 or 15.8. 17.3, 17.3. So average daily gain went up from 2.35 to 2.48. Right. Forage intake went down in a 1-to-1 ratio. So what type of response is that to supplement? Not partial, but substitution effect. Yeah. Okay. All right. Calcium, minerals, calcium carbonate, which is limestone. Okay, 0.15, but we may have to add more to check our potassium to Ca plus Mg, all right? Sodium, we're deficient in. I know we're going to have to add magnesium, so I'm actually going to add some magnesium here. And that can be done through magnesium oxide. It says toxic, but we have to get that high to make sure potassium to Ca plus Mg is below 2.2. Okay, so we'll check that in just a second. Okay, copper. Okay, 0.005 gets us there. And now zinc. Okay, 0.000005 gets us there. Need to take away some from forage. Okay, so this matches this, which matches this. Our C to P ratio is 1.9. We need to add some salt. Sodium chloride. Okay, so that gets us pretty good. Okay, so what is, someone get out a phone, 2.81 divided by 0.66 plus 0.54? 0.54. So we're not quite there. We need to add magnesium. Okay. Let's check it again. 2.8 divided by 0.66 plus 0.69. .07. We're good. We could decrease magnesium a little bit, but that's fine. All right. This animal, we would need to 0.36 times 16 is 5.76. That's a little higher than what I'd like, but I don't know, is what it is. Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right. Cool, guys. Thanks for listening. To my what? This one?
Mine's off.
Ah.
I don't know why. I have like everything is toxic. Like iron just keeps being toxic. But this is from when I took feeds because it's not up on our page. So I don't know if they updated it or. Yeah. Because I know the crude protein to phosphorus ratio on mine versus yours.
CA.
Yeah, like this was different than yours.
Oh, they may have updated the nutrient content of this. So I need to upload that to the team, or what is it, Canvas?